the first step was literally like, I need to go see a therapist because I'm acting like an immature boy.
You have to continuously get better if you want your marriage to get better.
My dad always was like, don't waste your talent. Don't waste your talent.
If you're in a relationship and you feel like I want to keep playing the field, then dude, you need to fucking cut that shit out, and you're not ready for a relationship.
You're a good-looking kid who's smart and athletic. Why are you not doing better in all of these things?
You have to be a good dad every day. You have to be a good husband moment by moment.
That's such a powerful line too, just to admit to your partner. Hey guys, just a reminder, if you're liking this podcast and liking me and Faiez, give us a follow, subscribe, or like on all the necessary channels. Thanks. I think it would be good to maybe share a little bit more insights into our relationships, maybe how we met each other, how we met our partners. What was that development like in our growth from most likely boys to men within those relationships?
Mm-hmm.
And then I was even okay with just sharing what past previous versions of myself were like in relationships with women and how terrible of a person I was.
100%. Absolutely awful.
Yeah. So awful. Like,
yeah.
You know, I think about when you brought up having to make amends and apologize, and then wondering even if that person even gives a shit about
at this point,
needing an apology or whatever. But I'm like, man, there's quite a few women that probably could use an apology from me.
Yeah, it's a bit cringe.
Yeah, yeah.
But the phrase "boys to men" was like 100% with me and my wife. I went from being a boy to a man in this relationship.
Yeah.
I mean, practically speaking, when we met, I was 23 and she was 32. And in a lot of ways, like Casey was surprised at my age, right? Like on the surface, people tend to be surprised when they find out my age. I've always been attracted to older people. Like you're older than me, right?
Yes.
But we're friends.
Yes, I am.
You're an old man. But when you're in an intimate relationship, there were many, many ways where it was obvious that I was 23.
Yeah.
And those ways were
You can't hide those.
You can't hide them. Like
that's just experience.
We were talking about it this morning and she was like, you remember when you did this? And she was like, I was like, oh.
Hold on, I want to know what this is.
So we met in class, right? We were on a group project, and I guess one Friday night, our class, we went out to a bar, and we were talking about how young boys, like to. There was a guy at the dog park that I was in Houston that like came up to Heather and was like, "Hey, your hair looks ratchet." But then like a couple of minutes later was like, "You want to go grab drinks?"
Hold on, wait, I don't know ratchet. Is that a compliment?
Ratchet's not a compliment. It means it's crazy.
Okay.
And then we walked past him on the trail today. She was like, that was the guy that asked me out to the bar a couple of weeks ago. And I was like, not remembering. And she was like, he came up and said like, my hair looked ratchet. And she was like, I don't know. That was kind of weird. But maybe that was his way of like, pushing the girl down on the playground to show her that he liked her. And I was like, oh yeah, that is a really fun way to flirt with girls. Like I remember being a kid and like pushing girls on the playground. I don't remember actually pushing girls, but I 100% did. And I was like, I don't think I did that with you in the beginning of a relationship. And she was like, oh, yes, you did. And I was like, what are you talking about? And she was like, remember when we went out to the bar and she was like, we were dancing and then I turned around and all of a sudden you weren't there. And I looked to the corner of the dance floor and you were standing there pointing and laughing at me because I was dancing by myself. And she was like, this motherfucker is 23 years old.
Oh my God. Yeah. Man, I don't even want to think about my 23 I was just so immature.
I didn't have a lot of life skills at that
Neither
point.
did I.
You know what I mean?
At
like
zero.
I hadn't had much opportunity to live life on my own at that point. It was high school to college, and college is such a protected environment.
Yeah,
like
such a bubble.
Your responsibilities, you have to go to class, like fucking boohoo. You know what I mean? Like,
I know.
Hey, y'all, don't forget, if you like what you're hearing on this show, just give us a subscribe. We really appreciate it. Thanks. And since she was in her early 30s, she'd had at least a solid decade of having to. I'm 31
And being the
right
older
now.
woman, that's like, okay, she's 9 years older than you, but really that's like 15 years older
It's a
than you.
big, and
Yeah.
it came up in a lot of ways. Like she just knew about basic things that I had very little experience with, like filing taxes and credit card statements and like shit like that. I was just not on top of by that time. And I'm 31 now. So I'm coming up on the age where she was when she met me, and I roast her all the time. I'm like, what the fuck was wrong with you? Like, I look at a 23-year-old now and I could never, fucking never. You're crazy.
I know. That's why I'm happy I'm older than Casey. I think it needed to happen that way with me and Casey. Because, man, nobody was putting up with my shit in my 20s. No older woman would have even remotely come close to me. She would have been like, fuck this guy.
So how did you become a boy to a man?
You know, it took Casey pretty much calling me out. And it starts at like different varying levels. So the first initial thing where I was emotionally unstable or projecting things or unleashing traumas that I didn't know I had or things like that, she was like, you need to go see a therapist. And she's like, I can't do it for you. Obviously conflict of interest. Like I'm not, but it was right when my like dad issues started to come up. And it was really interesting because like I definitely downplayed what my trauma was. And I think now there's kind of like, maybe you've heard this, that there's little T trauma, big T trauma. Probably most of mine was little T. I think there was one that was teetering on big T. But anyway, it was kind of like all starting to come to the surface, and it was manifesting itself in very emotional ways. And she was like, you have to go see a therapist. She's like, you need to talk this out and figure it out. Because I had all of a sudden seen her friends, male friends in her life, and their relationships with their parents and their fathers. And I'm like, huh, that's interesting. Mine was quite a bit different than this. It was the first time I had ever had a comparison that was like, it wasn't like knocking my dad at that time. It was just more like, wow, my experience was much different. And maybe I need to like unpack that a little bit because I'm getting a little emotional about these things. So that was like the first step, was literally like, I need to go see a therapist because I'm acting like an immature boy about these things that are starting to come up. And then it just evolved from that, you know.
Are you comfortable sharing any specific thing?
Yeah, I think my little T trauma was just, you know, and I want to preface with, I know my parents did the best they could. I think all parents are doing the best they can with the cards that they're dealt and the knowledge that they have and the experience maybe they had with their parents. So my littlest T traumas, if I can wrap it up into one thing, is just my dad projected so much of like his wants onto me that it didn't allow me to kind of get outside of that box. And then that manifested itself in like a ton of different ways. Mainly like, oh, you're really good at sports. This could be your meal ticket to go to a college, keep playing sports, you know, just that whole box. And not really diving into any of my other interests. And I get it. A lot of kids are, you know, you go through high school and you're just doing the best you can. But looking back, it was like, man, I really just stayed within that box so much that then once that was gone, it was your stereotypical cliche, like kind of identity crisis of like, well, what else am I besides like a basketball player or a baseball player or things like that? And then I've mentioned this before in other podcasts of, there was just no relationship with my father outside of sort of, he was my basketball coach for a little while, which that was like a whole thing.
Oh man.
When there was discipline and critique and not a lot of positive reinforcement. And I can't remember if I mentioned, we've talked about this, and I remember it was a big thing I had to let go of, which my dad always was like, don't waste your talent. Don't waste your talent. And that phrase in itself has such a negative connotation that looking back, I'm like, man, if I was a father, it'd be like, hey, how can we start to really master your talents instead of just saying, don't waste them? And I get it. My dad didn't have the skills to coach me, or like, I was just a much better athlete than he was. And so he didn't have an understanding. And there was, and again, no relationship where my dad understood maybe what was going on in my head at that time. To him, he was like, you're a good looking kid who's smart and athletic. Why are you not doing better in all of these things? Like, if I had what you had, I would have done this X, Y, and Z, which then that in itself coming from a parent is very damaging as well. So.
And how did that little T trauma with your dad manifest itself in your relationship with Casey?
I think for the longest time, I was fearful. I mean, what does it always come down to? You're fearful of not being good enough. That's don't waste your talents. What is that? You're not good enough. Mm-hmm. And I think with all my relationships with women, I was self-sabotaging because I knew there would come a point where like I would be revealed because I was wearing all these masks and that they would want nothing to do with me. And so I basically led that self-sabotage charge of being a shitty person. So then at least at some point they would just walk away because they're like, Logan's a piece of shit. And I wouldn't have to deal with like the breakup or walking away or leaving.
What does like the self-sabotaging look like for you? Or did it look like?
Oh, I cheated all the time. It was, and that was again a form of not feeling worthy in a weird way, because then it's, oh, if these other girls are showing me interest, I need to take advantage of that because I'm not worthy enough to receive. Like I didn't feel like I was good. It was so self-sabotaging in that on one hand, I'm like cheating to destroy one relationship and not have to be the one that walks away from it, which is causing worthiness problems. And then on the other hand, I'm going to these other women who I'm cheating on with, and then I don't even feel worthy to have other women. So it's like whatever angle I was taking with females in my life and relationships, it was, I'm not worthy. So I need to take whatever is coming to me now because eventually I'll be found out and this will all stop and go away.
Do you think that the optionality that cheating gives you, cheating is like taking advantage of optionality, right?
Right.
It's the opposite of committing to the one relationship.
What does Chris Rock say? He's like, you're only as faithful as your options.
That's such a thought, like in that show, that's such a thought-provoking line.
I know.
Do you think that saying yes to that behavior made you feel good enough? Like having those options?
In that moment.
In that moment.
For sure.
Because I don't know that.
That was like the cognitive dissonance that I'm like telling myself that it makes me feel good, but really deep down, it of course does not. Mm-hmm. And I, of course, don't feel worthy of these women liking me and them wanting to be with me. I also I was so self-conscious in high school about my looks and my attractiveness and being Asian. Like I buried that whole identity of myself being half Korean in high school. Like I didn't consciously be like, oh, I hate being Asian. It wasn't that bad, but I definitely just naturally gravitated more to my white American side, my friends, the way I operated in the world, all that stuff. And so as I got older and started to realize, oh, women are attracted to me, I guess this Asian thing's kind of cool, then I 100% took advantage of that.
I don't know that. I saw a video the other day. Oh, it was, is flirting in a relationship cheating? And I don't remember what the conclusion of the video was, but there was a line where one character was like, I like the attention. I just like the attention. Whatever. I scrolled it. It's not, the algorithm gave it to me, but I don't think that's that applicable to me. But I was like, is that what it is? Is it cheating, liking the attention that you're getting, and that's filling the void of not feeling good enough? For me, I think that that's what it was, because in my first long-term relationship, or not first, but one of my more important ones in college, I was cheating constantly. Like it wasn't even is this wrong? It was
there wasn't even a thought to it.
It's just, we're going out. Like the options are there. This is what we're doing. Like we're going out to go and find women. This is
zero conscious.
There was no like the energy was just making sure that I didn't get found out.
Right.
Right. Make sure a thing doesn't get posted online, you know, all of that energy that went in that direction.
Yeah.
But it was never like, I shouldn't be doing this.
Yeah.
Which is honestly crazy.
It's so crazy. Like, because then I also had to unpack that, because then there's that level of guilt and shame once you do start to get older and more mature and recognize what you've done. And luckily, like, yes, there were some feelings hurt, but I don't feel like I like dramatically hurt anybody other than myself. But then unpacking that shame and guilt on top of having to figure out the self-worth component of that therapy or whatever you want to call it, or self-development, that was the worst. That was the worst. I don't know what it was like for you.
I actually never realized how much I was hurting some of the girls that I was cheating with until honestly several years later when I had some perspective. And once I got found out by my girlfriend, my rationale was like, no, you don't understand. I love you. Like, I care about you.
Hold on. How old were you at this time?
This was like late teens, early 20s, right? And I was like, none of those girls mattered. It was just fun. Like, it's just what we're doing. Like, you matter. And in my head, I think that was true. I thought that was true, right? But there was safety in knowing that I had this relationship, right? Somebody that I could be myself with. Mm-hmm. And then I could go out into the world and, you know,
be a
boy with the boys and be a different person.
Yeah.
So there was that happening. But then I realized that at least a handful, to my knowledge, of the girls that I was playing around with thought that I was legitimately interested in them and wanted to be in a relationship with me. And that did not calculate whatsoever in my mind.
Did all the girls know that you had a girlfriend, or did some of them not?
Of course not.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So none of them knew.
I don't think so.
Okay. See, I had a couple in mind that were like, they knew I had a girlfriend.
Like, there was this one instance. I guess I'm sharing this because I feel like a lot of guys relate to it. And depending on the phase of life that you're in, I mean, if you're listening to us talking, you're probably past this stage in your life. Most likely, but maybe not.
Yeah.
And like, it happens. And also, I didn't have friends around me at that time that called me out on that behavior because they were all doing it too.
Yeah.
And so maybe you recognize one of these stories that we're sharing and realize that, okay, you know, this is the time for me to rise above this behavior.
Yeah.
Or if you're in a relationship and you feel like I want to keep playing the field, like I'm not ready, then dude, you need to fucking cut that shit out. And you're not ready for a relationship. That you don't deserve the girl that's being committed to you. Yeah. I didn't deserve the girl that was being committed to me. I was wasting fucking years of her life. That wasn't right.
I know.
But there's one distinct memory that I have of a girl I saw at a party. She was hot. We started hooking up. And like, after a number of times of hooking up, at one time at her place, I just like had a moment where I was like, I'm bored. And I told her like that I was going to go get coffee. I don't remember what my excuse was, but just to get out. And then I just went to my friend's place and never came back. And she was just like sitting there waiting for me. And then like an hour or 30 minutes later, whatever, I just started getting a bunch of missed calls. And I just like silenced it and ignored it. And I think back on that and I'm like, that is so hurtful.
So hurtful.
It's really hurtful. And I don't know who this girl is. We don't follow each other on social media or anything. But like, energetically, I would love to make amends to her. And she probably doesn't give a shit at this point. You know what I mean?
Yeah, who knows?
But you never know. That experience also could have impacted her.
That could have been traumatizing to her, not knowing what happened to you. She could think you're dead.
No idea. And, you know, that's just one example of many versions of how, you know, in self-centered, self-seeking behaviors, I was probably hurting a lot of people with that behavior. So
I used to think when I had surrounded myself with these friends that looking back were just as quote unquote shady as me. And when I started to kind of step away from that, it was when I met Casey. I was so judgmental in thinking like, oh, all these guys, like, they're just acting this way now. And good thing I walked away from that. And I can't believe I was hanging out with those people. And then now understanding energy more and your frequency, it's like I was manifesting those friendships. I was the one attracting those guys and those people. I was the ringleader of that group. Like, it wasn't like these other people that were bad influences on me. I was probably the bad influence on them. Like, yeah, it was terrible. And then I just kept manifesting those nights out and partying and this and that, and those guys coming in and out of my life and all the shady things that went on. And it's like, and I kept telling myself like, oh, I'm not like that. Like how easily we lie to ourselves. I'm like, oh, well, I'm not that bad. Like, I still do good things. So it's like, I can justify it by like all the good things I'm doing. Like, I'm not as bad as that.
Are you still friends with any of those guys?
No.
Me neither.
I have since, and I wish them all well. I truly, really do. I still catch maybe, some people on Instagram here or there. And honestly, there's a part of me that I'm like, I hope they're like, oh, I'm glad I'm not friends with Logan anymore. Like at that moment in time in our life of like what was going on with me, I hope they can look the same maybe and notice, or again, I don't even know if they care or even pay attention or whatever. But at that time when we split, I honestly, truly hope they were like, oh, I'm so glad I'm not friends with Logan anymore. Because nothing good was being manifested from those relationships.
I'm sure anybody from that era looks at me now, and I actually, I don't know why I say I'm sure, but like I have become a square in many ways. Like I have optimized for boringness compared to that lifestyle in a lot of ways, but it's not boring to me. It's super solid.
Yeah.
And actually, there's only one person from that era in my life that I will hold in my heart for, that we had a special bond. And he was a groomsman next to you in my wedding. You ended up becoming fairly friendly with this one person.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
So I won't name who it is, but I think you'll know who it is. It was the pretty one.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of pretty groomsmen on my side, but and he's still living that life. We were catching up at my wedding, and I was like, and he's still in a relationship, long distance relationship with the girl that he was dating way back in the day. It was almost 10 years ago.
Yeah.
But they haven't gotten married. And I was like, dude, like, why?
What are you doing?
Like, what are you doing? Why don't you put a fucking ring on it and let's get this show on the road? He's like, you don't get it, man. You're not in the game anymore. It's too much fun. And I was like, bro, I love you. I wish the absolute best for you, but like, this is why I don't talk to you anymore. I didn't say that, but in my head, I'm just like, this is why we don't interact as much as we used to. You played an important part in my life. That's how I picked my groomsmen. I said, anybody that has like helped shaped who I am now, whether we have an active relationship or not now, I want you by my side because you've helped made me who I am. That's how I picked. And I don't really interact with him, even though he was literally my roommate for years and my best friend. Yeah. And he definitely shaped who I was. But I was like, we're 10 years past that, and you're still making the same choices.
Well, it's what did we talk about in the other podcast about just the groups of friends as you start to evolve and grow and change and kind of go to the next level. You just run out of commonalities and things to connect on.
Yeah.
You can't talk about the same things anymore.
Yeah. And I live in downtown. Like on the weekends, everybody's out. I get to like look out the window and people are partying. If I need to like take my dogs out, fucking people are going crazy. And
you are in the thick of it.
I'm in the thick of it. And it's a lot of fun. I love to vicariously live through everybody's energy. But I look at grown men between your age and mine that are living that life at like 1 a.m. on a Friday or a Saturday. And I'm like, I try not to judge.
Of course.
But I think instinctually I am. And I just wonder why.
Well, I believe it's pain. It's pain. You're coping with something. It's not just, oh, I'm going out and having fun and being social. There's something underlying there that you can't find joy in life outside of doing those things. And again, it's no judgment. It's just like, I actually have a lot of compassion for it. I'm like, well, what's actually going on? That's where you find your happiness, I guess.
It's such a different direction. It's like I think of it as going wide versus going deep. Once my close friends now are all men that are married. Not all, but a lot of them are married and probably have young kids like yourself. And that's going deep, right? Like, and we all find fulfillment in, you have to continuously get better if you want your marriage to get better, if you want to have a good relationship with your kids. And like the guys that I surround myself with now are very committed to that process. Like you are daily, moment by moment, committed to being the best husband and father that you can be, right? Probably more so than anything. And that takes consistent evolution. You can never take for granted that I am a good dad. That's just not a fact that you can take for granted. You have to be a good dad every day. You have to be a good husband moment by moment.
And I want to be now.
And you want to be.
Yeah.
And that want is what I optimize for in a relationship now. And for my acquaintances or people that I interact with that aren't in that phase of life, maybe on some level they want that, but they are not choosing that behavior moment by moment.
Yeah.
There's one guy in our office who's like still living that life. We're great. We're super friendly. He'll come back and report his, escapades of the weekend, and we roast him because the rest of us are in committed relationships. And, who's the latest relationship, and the excuses for why a girl or a relationship is not going to work out is so silly. They're so shallow.
Yeah.
And it's like, they're clearly, with some level of objectivity, just ways of avoiding the personal growth that is required for the relationship to work.
That's why it's a shallow excuse, is because it's a shallow being that's involved.
The
Like,
solution,
really
you have to
simple.
go deeper to actually resolve the issue.
Yeah.
And it's like, I would rather avoid that.
Yeah.
And that's just, I find it satisfying.
Yeah. I think I need a person's, in order to have a really deep relationship, I need a person's wants to have depth. And I want them to have desires that give them fulfillment, or where they find fulfillment in that. Because then it's like, even if we don't necessarily have a lot in common, say you're not an entrepreneur or something or whatever, but as long as you have that purpose and fulfillment, then I feel like you're going to go deep and we can talk about pretty much anything, no matter where you're at on that growth.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. Like on the surface, we may have different interests, this and that, but if somebody is intentional about why they are doing and making the choices they are in their life, I resonate with that big time.
Yeah.
There is some level of intent and purpose behind why they're living the way they're living. And that's just not true for a lot of people.
Yeah, just be a conscious being instead of operating so unconsciously through the world, or without even looking at yourself in a objective manner. Which is what, I lived a lot of my life doing that. I'm not casting judgment. I absolutely did that for a very long time.
Yeah, it ends up leading to pain.
Yeah.
And the thing is that, like, this is what I tell my brother or Heather, there's always the question of choose your hard, right? And there's the hard of living that life and hiding and lying and cheating and the feelings that I'm masking. And of course, there was plenty of drugs and alcohol when I was living that life. And that was hard for its own reasons. And it will
always catch up to you.
It always caught up to me when I got found out, or, whatever happened. And that was hard. Those moments were hard. And when I'm in my relationship, and like anytime I need to make an amends, or, Heather's like, stop, you Casey's like, you need to go to therapy. Like this is, you know, you need to go and work
You
on this.
figure out your shit.
That's fucking hard.
Yeah.
Probably if that was me, which it was at different points of our relationship, I had the same thing. She was like, this is not going to work if we don't go talk to somebody about this. And my response was, hey, how about fuck you? There's nothing wrong with me. Actually, you're the problem. Like that's my gut response.
Of course.
And it's hard to be like, okay, let's go. And for me and Heather, that was around race. I think I shared that in a previous episode. But a couple months into our relationship, I went on a rant because I got triggered by something, and I shared the worst versions of how I felt about race at that time. Mm-hmm. And she was like, how are we supposed to be in an interracial relationship if that's how you feel about white people?
Yeah.
At that point, I was like, well, you don't get it. And I'm going to make you get it. So we'll go to therapy so that we can.
You understand my
side. So that you understand.
Yeah.
But what ended up happening by being committed to therapy is we ended up getting each other. And dude, that took years. Mm-hmm. It really took. And there were moments where I thought she would never get it. And actually what I needed to hear from her at some point was her saying that I will never get it. Because a lot of the time she acted like she got it. And I was like, you don't.
That's such a powerful line too, just to admit to your partner, like, I understand what you're saying, but unfortunately I will never get it.
Yeah.
I think it's so powerful to just admit that. And then the other person's like, okay, at least they're not acting like they understand or they get it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I could kind of exhale at that point.
Yeah.
And I think when she admitted that gave her, it changed her frame of mind to then become curious. Well, if I don't get it, I do want to get it. So now how can I start asking questions to try to learn? But also I've in part removed my expectation that she should understand. Mm-hmm. And also, you know, we've talked about in the past, I'm not going to expect her to shoulder the burden of all of history's mistakes, right? And also how other people have treated me. That's not her fault. Mm-hmm. And that took a lot of evolution. Yeah. Even now, we're going to California today, and we're going to be with my family for 2 weeks. And my parents, more specifically my dad, relates to his culture maybe like your Korean mom in a way that I don't. I don't live my day-to-day life in that culture. I live my life in a, you know, whatever culture we live in here in Austin, and it's different than his, and that hurts him. I know on different levels that hurts my dad. He feels like I've lost his culture.
Yeah.
And when Heather has to join that, there's like a constant negotiation of give and take. Of, for example, when my dad's not around his family, he's fine. But if his family's around, his little T, big T trauma is that he's going to be judged by his family. Mm. And so all of me and my cousins that have married white girls, every one of them has responded to this expectation differently. In Asian culture, expectation from the parents is really strong. It's just traditional, whether you're East Asian, Chinese, Korean, Japanese, or Indian.
I've heard about it with my mom's friends' kids. Yeah.
What the parents say goes.
Yeah.
For the rest of your life, you respect your elders, and what the parents say goes. And that's
There's a battle though with the first gen that's living in America, which is
what I am.
You. Yeah.
Exactly. And the first gen is always battling that because in the West, that's not it.
No.
In the West, it's not what I mean. I'm over 18 years old. Like my parents don't get to decide what I do. And so when we're around my dad's family with him, Heather could wear short shorts and it would be fine if we're by ourselves. But if all of a sudden one of my dad's siblings is around, he becomes really conscious of, you know, my daughter. He has 2 white daughter-in-laws at this point, right? It's just me and my brother, and we both married white girls. And like all of a sudden it becomes, we're paying attention to how we're dressing.
Yeah.
And for my sister-in-law, Catherine and Heather, they're like, this doesn't even make sense because when they're not around, your dad doesn't care. He's not even being himself around his family. So why should we have to be different? And then me and my brother are like, it doesn't make any sense, but I don't know what to tell you. Like, and I've had to come around to a point where I'm like, look, if you don't want to, you don't have to. But when in Rome, do as the Romans. For Heather, that's very hard. She's not like that at all.
I'm sure.
She's I am who I am, and people can either love me or hate me for it. But she gives a lot. So I know for sure over the next 2 weeks, there's going to be a lot of moments where me and her are going to go in private and have to talk things out and come back to each other.
Hold on, you guys are going to California, and it's your family's going to be there?
Yeah, it's my dad's 60th. And so it's so interesting. Like my mom's siblings live in the Bay Area and my dad has siblings that live in the Bay Area. My mom's family is very liberal. My dad's family is very conservative. So this weekend we're going to stay with my mom's brother. And they're just like us. Like it doesn't matter. We'll be who we are and it's fine. Yeah. But the following weekend we'll be with my dad's sister. And they're traditional. You look at them and you're like, those are immigrants. With my mom's family, you don't think that. They look like me and you. We're chilling. And the thing is they're super sweet. They're super nice, but they do genuinely in their heart and in their minds belong to another culture. And
which is completely valid.
It is valid. And that's for me, because I've lived with that my whole life. I am more malleable. I don't necessarily feel like I'm losing a sense of myself when I adapt to another person's environment. But for Heather, that's not the case. She didn't grow up with that. And so now when somebody who's not used to that asks you why, it's almost like when a kid asks you, why, Dad? Like, why is it like this? And you're like, I don't know. I've never thought about it. This is just how I do it.
Which, by the way, Bunny is in that stage where he asks why to everything.
Yeah, and I'm sure that it's fun, and then also in moments it's challenging.
No, I definitely have to take a step back and be like, okay, how am I going to explain this one?
Yeah.
So I'll never lie to him, and I'll never just say just because.
Yeah, just because.
No.
And sometimes, honestly, maybe the answer is not a good answer.
No, 100%. I jokingly said the other day, but also kind of serious. I can't remember exactly what it was. I was like, well, because you could die, Bunny. Like, we got to that 10th why.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, because you could die.
What did he say?
He's just like, why? You know?
Yeah.
So, and truthfully, I said that because it was honest and because I was like, maybe this is the thing that will be the last why if I say this. Nope.
Okay, well, let's talk about why you will die from this.
Yeah, okay, we can unpack this a little more.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, I think, I was thinking about, I think it is a fine line of being malleable to adapt to other people's environments and still maintaining your authenticity. Because I probably I weighed heavier on the like chameleon side when I was younger and in my 20s, partly because I think when you're wearing a bunch of masks, that's just what you end up doing. And you're not being authentic. Then I overcorrected to the side of, okay, I'm going to be myself and not give a fuck in any environment that I'm in. And then realizing, well, that's like not really great either.
Yep.
I think there's, as we've said before, that middle pillar, that middle lane where you can do both. You can be respectful to how others are, whether that's liberal, Republican, conservative, whatever, as long as you just remain curious instead of judgmental about it. I think there's a way to navigate the world of just being able to be around anybody and enjoy them and take a moment to like experience their world. Like, I don't want to make this political, but it's kind of the easiest one sometimes of like, I remember when I finally sort of just like gave up on identifying like liberal or conservative, because there was this moment that I was talking to somebody about why they're Republican. And it dawned on me, I'm like, oh, because there's a couple really important topics to you that those are the things that matter so much in your life based on your upbringing and your environment and your parents and where you grew up, that oh, I can see why that's why you side with that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all it really took. I was like, I didn't want to try to convince them of something else because where they grew up and what they did was so drastically different than what maybe a liberal person has grown up with.
Yep.
And I think that's why it's so important to be curious. And my curiosity didn't hit until maybe an older age. And partly that's another thing that I think Casey brought online with me, because she was obviously so curious about life and people and why things are the way they are, that curiosity will lend itself to letting go of judgment, I think.
I try to be curious, respectful, and also I can hold my own opinion.
Yeah.
I had to go through a period where I didn't know what I thought. Well, I was attracted to Heather because she was so herself, because I was such a chameleon.
Yeah.
And so I had to learn how to become more myself, and she's had to learn how to become more of a chameleon. And because it's both, like you said, there's two things that are very important to somebody who's extremely conservative, for example, right? Guns and abortion.
And taxes.
And taxes. And so when I go around Heather's family who live in the country, there's nobody around. I'll never forget the first time I met one of her family members. It was her grandmother. We went to her dad's house. They were on vacation, and we must have tripped an alarm, and we were just hanging out outside, and she rolled up on the property, gun out, drawn. This is an old lady with a gun. And then she realized it was us, and she was fine. And I was like, God damn, that was okay.
Yeah.
Like, we're in the country. And over the years, I began to appreciate one July 4th. We saw these lights coming down the long road, and all the kids were there. We were popping fireworks, and nobody knew who it was that was approaching. So her stepmom went inside and came back out with her pistol and was like, I don't know who's approaching us. And I've come to understand that if you live in the country, it's not like in the city where if something dangerous is about to happen, the police aren't going to get there for 20 or 30 minutes.
Right.
You have to be able to protect yourself.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, so we like to oversimplify the gun debate in a lot of ways. I'm not going to go deep on this podcast, but as it relates to understanding perspectives, the perspective of relating to gun violence while living in a city is different than while living in the country.
1,000%. Yeah.
And the other example for abortion, so in one of my classes at Harvard, there was one guy who was a clerk for a Supreme Court justice. As smart as you can get, he was a lawyer, and he was conservative. And I'll never forget, we spent one night at the bar with our class, and me and him debated abortion until 4 a.m. And there was people around the table, and we were all talking. There were women there, liberal women. There were men there, and the women were sharing their experience, and it wasn't heated. It was a very intelligent, understanding debate on the topic for 6 hours with beers. And I completely respected this guy's opinion, but he would just never be able to vote blue because abortion was a no-go issue for him because of his faith.
Right.
He had a Catholic faith, and for him, he just could never agree with making abortion legal. And I'm like, it would be very easy for me before this conversation to be like, anybody who thinks the opposite of this is just an idiot, right? They're just dumb. And here I am having a conversation with somebody who is extremely intelligent, extremely articulate, and their faith is just that important to them, and they hold this view. And I said, okay, well, I completely understand your opinion, and on these specific things, I may disagree with you, but I respect you nonetheless.
Yeah.
That is who I choose to be as a person.
If I was going to be so steadfast in my beliefs about one side of something, why in the world could I not give that same respect to somebody who is so steadfast in their beliefs in the other side of that?
Right.
We're not all going to think the same. Now, I definitely think we should all take time to challenge our beliefs.
For sure.
But if you do that and you still feel the way you feel, then that's just the way it is. you know?
I almost think that if your beliefs don't change over time, it doesn't have to for everything. But if you look and say, if we had to sit down and write down, like, what are some beliefs of mine that have changed over the last 10 years, and you don't have any, maybe you haven't been thinking about anything then.
Yeah.
And we can probably end on this note, but I remember somebody framing how you can understand if somebody is an independent thinker or not. And the way that you can assess if somebody is an independent thinker or not is whether you can predict what their opinion is going to be on a subject matter. So can I guess where you fall on taxes? Can I guess where you fall on abortion? Can I guess where you fall on immigration? Can I guess where you fall on police budget? If I can
nail
what your opinions are on that, then you're probably not an independent thinker.
Very true.
Yeah. And I feel relatively good that nobody can guess my opinions on any of those things because I think them through.
Yeah.
So anyways, we went from being fuckboys to talking about.
I know. We could get into a whole topic of opinions too.
Yeah.
In the next podcast. Are they worth anything?
We were Heather and I were on a walk the other day early in the morning, and I was like, does the truth exist? And she was like, we're not doing that this morning.
Yeah, we could get into what is truth. Speaking of, one of my least favorite buzz terms is your truth.
Whoa.
We could unpack that whole thing.
Yeah, I'd like to. Let's talk about that. An upcoming episode on truth
and opinions.
Yeah.
Ooh, that could be a really good one.
Interesting.
All right, well, this was a fun one. I feel like that just flew by.
Yeah.
We didn't even talk about the 4 things that kill love in a relationship.
It's okay.
Or things that maybe you recognize a relationship is coming to an end.
Yeah.
We could also get into that on another one.
Yeah. Well, if you liked the episode, give us a subscribe and we'll see you in the next one.
Peace.